But we are at an important fork in the road. I think we are coming up on the global realization that there's a lot more paper gold than there is real gold, that the central banks of the world, especially the Federal Reserve, have been leasing out gold in increasing quantities as the price rises, to quote Alan Greenspan, former head of the Federal Reserve, in congressional testimony. So we're coming to the point where they're not going to be able to keep this scam up anymore. The vast majority of the people in Congress are clueless. And so your listeners, I think, could play a very, very big role in educating their lawmakers on this before the crisis hits, because I tell you, if and when the crisis hits, and I expect it may be just around the corner, the establishment's going to have all the prepared talking points. It's going to be like we saw in 2008. If you don't pass this, there's going to be martial law. The banking system's going to collapse. People are going to starve. So they've got to be prepared in advance to move us in the right direction, and it's going to be a heavy lift.
You're watching Silver News Daily. Subscribe for more.
The paper gold scam is cracking, and when it breaks, silver won't just rise. It will detonate. Alex Newman isn't whispering warnings. He's shouting from the rooftops. Governments will beg for your physical metals before they lose control entirely. We've all seen the signs: central banks hoarding gold, investors bailing on fiat, and now silver breaking above critical levels like 33.45. But this time, it's different. The confidence game that's held the financial system together for decades is slipping. And once faith collapses in these digital IOUs masquerading as real assets, only one thing will matter: what you actually hold in your hand. History has a brutal way of repeating itself, and in every monetary collapse, the masses who laughed at precious metals end up chasing them too late. So what's really going on behind the scenes? And why does Alex Newman believe that silver is about to become the most wanted asset on the planet? Let's break it down.
The Arabian Peninsula, the one before that in Egypt. So I try to go to these every year because they are so significant, Dunnigan. I think your average American is clueless about the role of the climate scam in the creation of this one world order, because the media in the United States is very strategically keeping total silence about it. You know, occasionally they'll say something about, oh, hottest year on record, everybody be scared. But generally speaking, very little reporting on these issues, because they know most Americans don't believe the scam, and their own polling data shows that. I've got their polls. They know most Americans reject the hypothesis that human activities are destroying the climate. And they know that if Americans figured this out, that this was even happening, there would be an uprising and the whole clown show would be brought to a screeching halt. So this is one of the most important things happening in the world right now. The meeting that they're about to have in Brazil coming up later this year, the COP30 in Belém, is going to be the biggest of all the climate summits that has ever taken place. It happens with the backdrop of the International Court of Justice now preparing to issue the first ever ruling on what they're calling the legal obligations of states with respect to climate change. This is like the world Supreme Court, if you listen to the UN. And so this is coming to a head. Trump is doing his best to dismantle this. In fact, he said one of the top priorities of the MAGA movement needs to be to destroy the climate hoax. But and he's doing a good job on that here at home. Lee Zeldin just announced we're going to be turning back the clock on this endangerment finding. The idea that Barack Obama's EPA put this in, that CO2, the gas we exhale, is a dangerous pollution that needs to be regulated and controlled. So that's being wound back. And on his first day in office, Donald Trump signed the executive order on putting America first in international environmental agreements, not just getting us out of the Paris Agreement effective immediately, but getting us out of all UN climate agreements negotiated under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. But what's happening in Brazil, under the Paris Agreement, every 5 years, governments are supposed to come with their new and improved pledges for how they're going to save humanity from climate change. Usually, Western countries promise they're going to keep dismantling their economy, keep destroying the middle class. Communist China promises they're going to keep building up their coal-fired power plants. They're going to keep building up their infrastructure and their manufacturing. So we're going to see what happens in Brazil now. I don't know whether the Trump administration is planning on sending anyone. When he was president last time, I was at the one in Poland, and Trump sent a hilarious delegation to troll them. They had a big event on how coal and oil were critical in liberating humanity from backbreaking labor and expanding life spans and all this. So this is going to be a really interesting climate summit with Trump saying we're not going to pay for this stuff anymore, and all the rest of the world saying, but you have to keep destroying your economy. So I'll do my best to keep the good folks informed, because unfortunately there is virtually no legit.
For decades, the gold market has been propped up by promises. Paper contracts, digital claims, and speculative instruments that outnumber physical reserves by unimaginable ratios. This isn't conspiracy, it's accounting. The paper gold market, built on futures and ETFs, operates on a fractional reserve system where multiple owners believe they hold the same ounce. But Alex Newman, argues the illusion is fracturing. As trust in financial intermediaries evaporates, investors are starting to question whether they'll ever actually see the metal their contracts supposedly guarantee. And here's where silver enters the scene. Not as a sideshow, but as the next explosive chapter. Because while gold's paper market is bloated and manipulated, silver's market is smaller, more volatile, and dangerously understocked. Once panic sets in and physical redemption begins, it won't be gold that runs first. It will be silver. Because the moment paper promises fail, everyone will rush toward the physical market, and there simply won't be enough to go around.
Well, I think we're at a fork in the road, Dunnigan, and I think Judy understands this very well. I was unbelievably pleased to see Trump nominate her last time around for the Federal Reserve Board. Of course, that didn't happen, but the fact that he nominated her was a very good sign that he gets this and that he's got people around him who get this. But we are at an important fork in the road. I think we are coming up on the global realization that there's a lot more paper gold than there is real gold, that the central banks of the world, especially the Federal Reserve, have been leasing out gold in increasing quantities as the price rises, to quote Alan Greenspan, former head of the Federal Reserve, in congressional testimony. So we're coming to the point where they're not going to be able to keep this scam up anymore, and that's going to lead to a very significant crisis. And out of that crisis, I think we could go, broadly speaking, one of two ways. Either we move back toward constitutional currency. Our Constitution says no state is able to make anything other than gold or silver into legal tender. We move back in that direction of sound money, getting rid of the Federal Reserve, rebuilding on a solid foundation, or we move very, very rapidly into either regional fiat currencies, if not outright global fiat currency under the IMF, something they've been preparing for several decades now, publicly at least. So we have a very, very dangerous situation emerging here. I think Trump understands this pretty well. I think he wants to do the right thing, but I think the headwinds from the deep state, from the globalists, from the IMF, from the World Bank, from the Federal Reserve, from the banking cartel, it's going to be very, very difficult. So, I think this is, again, somewhere where your viewers, your listeners need to be active in this process. Set up a meeting with your member of Congress. You're going to find very likely your member of Congress is clueless about these things. And I've talked to many members of Congress, some of them on the record. Congressman Alex Mooney, I interviewed him last year. He had a bill to repeg the U.S. dollar to gold. So there are some people in Congress who have a good grasp of these things, but the vast majority of the people in Congress are clueless. And so your listeners, I think, could play a very, very big role in educating their lawmakers on this before the crisis hits, because I tell you, if and when the crisis hits, and I expect it may be just around the corner, the establishment's going to have all the prepared talking points. It's going to be like we saw in 2008. If you don't pass this, there's going to be martial law. The banking system's going to collapse. People are going to starve. So they've got to be prepared in advance to move us in the right direction, and it's going to be a heavy lift.
Silver's already on the move, and the charts don't lie. After breaking above the $33.40 pivot, traders are now watching $34.24 and $35.40 seen with laser focus. These aren't just numbers, they're pressure points. Break them, and the next stop could be the $50 mark that silver has only touched twice in modern history. But this isn't just technical hype. The market is responding to something deeper, a growing sense that silver is still wildly undervalued, especially when compared to gold. The gold-to-silver ratio remains stretched beyond historic norms, a flashing red signal that a realignment is overdue. And unlike gold, silver's price isn't just driven by investor demand, it's tethered to industrial need, which is exploding. Traders aren't just betting on a short-term rally, they're positioning for the moment the dam breaks. And with each pullback being scooped up by buyers hungry for real metal, it's becoming clear. This is a coiled spring. One sustained breakout, especially above $35, could trigger a cascade of buy orders and panic short covering that sends silver parabolic.
And again, I would start by saying I don't trust Howard Lutnick. He may be a nice guy. I don't know him, but he was raising money for Hillary Clinton in 2015, and he was right at the center of the effort to build the global carbon markets. So, I like what he's saying very much. Whether we should take him at his word, I think remains to be seen. But we know that Trump has a history of expressing desires like this, right? Before he was elected the first time around, he was talking about the desirability of going back to a gold monetary system where they wouldn't be able to destroy and devalue our currency, where they wouldn't be able to steal our purchasing power. So Donald Trump understands these things far better than people realize, both on the Federal Reserve front and also on how the income tax was necessary to support this fraudulent monetary system that we have today. So I think Trump would like to see some really, really significant changes like that. He's talked publicly about the desire to have tariffs once again become the primary source of revenue for the federal government. I think that's a very good idea. And I think to the extent that it's in Trump's power, we'll see a move in that direction. But obviously, a lot's going to depend on Congress. And I think all of your viewers know very, very well, Dunnigan, the Republican margin is razor thin. And when you factor in the fact that a very significant chunk of the GOP caucus is what we call rhinos, it's going to be very hard to get big changes like that through Congress right now.
What's fueling this fire beneath silver isn't just momentum. It's a perfect storm of macroeconomic chaos. The U.S. Consumer Confidence Index has hit a 12-year low. And with the Federal Reserve now widely expected to slash rates, the message is clear. The economy is weaker than they're letting on. And when yields fall, silver shines brighter. Lower interest rates erode the appeal of cash and bonds, pushing capital into safe havens, and unlike gold, silver is still cheap enough for retail investors to pile in. But there's more. Trade tensions are back in the headlines as Trump's administration floats new tariff threats, rattling markets and reigniting fears of global supply chain shocks. The world is bracing for inflation, geopolitical fragmentation, and monetary instability, and silver is riding that wave as both a hedge and a high-octane bet on chaos. As these pressures mount, the paper world looks increasingly unstable, and the real world, the world of tangible metals, is where the smart money is quietly moving.
Well, it's a good question, Dunnigan. In my own conversations with some of the people involved here, the answer would be yes. There is a very, very serious willingness and desire to make sure that justice comes about. And some of these conversations were public. I had Kash Patel on my show for 30 minutes to talk about the government gangsters that he ran up against and his desire to bring them to justice. So I think unless the rogue courts try to shut all of this down, there's a very real chance that we're going to see some serious accountability here. There are still some swamp monsters within the Trump administration, including on the Justice Department side, but there's a lot of decent, honorable people there, and some of them were personally targeted in the most vicious and vile ways possible by the previous administration. So I think the left and the fake media will try to frame this as an issue of vengeance. It's not an issue of vengeance. It's an issue of accountability. It's an issue of justice. And the crimes weren't just perpetrated against Trump and his family and General Flynn and Steve Bannon and Paul Manafort and Roger Stone. And, we could keep listing, Peter Navarro. These were crimes perpetrated against the American people. These were crimes perpetrated against our constitutional order. And there's a lot of people within the administration who understand that. And they understand that if we allow that to fly this time, it's going to come back with a vengeance in 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, however long it takes these people to regain power. And we simply cannot allow that for everybody's sake.
Behind silver's quiet rise is a roaring supply crisis that most investors still don't see coming. The Silver Institute is projecting yet another year of market deficits in 2025, the fifth in a row. Industrial demand is hitting record highs, especially from sectors like solar, electric vehicles, and advanced electronics, all of which have no substitute for silver's unique conductive properties. But here's the problem. Mine production isn't keeping up. Years of underinvestment, rising extraction costs, and geopolitical instability in key mining regions have left the supply side gasping for air. At the same time, demand from the investment world is quietly surging, with more silver being delivered into COMEX and CME warehouses not withdrawn. That's not retail speculation. That's serious accumulation. And when demand outpaces supply year after year, a breaking point becomes inevitable. Add to this the looming threat of a short squeeze, where institutional short positions could be forced to unwind under pressure, and you have the makings of a violent, uncontrollable price spike. Silver isn't just scarce, it's vanishing.
This is a massive scandal, then again. There is no way that we can look at these pardons and think they're legitimate. I've said from the very beginning, they ought to be treated as illegitimate. And there's a variety of different ways you could look at it that make them illegitimate, not just the auto signing and the robo pen, whatever. This is unprecedented in history, where you just have a blanket pardon for any crime you may have committed over a 10-year period. That is simply absurd. The pardon power was intended to be used by the president in an example where there was a miscarriage of justice for a particular crime. Hey, this guy was accused of this and he probably didn't do it, or this guy was accused of this, but there were circumstances that should have been taken into consideration, not 10 whole years of crimes we're just going to wipe away with the magic pen for hundreds, if not thousands, of criminals who weren't just committing regular crimes, right? And I mean, corruption's bad enough. In many cases, these are people who were actively working to subvert our constitutional order. These were people who I would argue in some cases might even be accused of treason. And so I think it's way past time for justice to be carried out here. And I was very encouraged even before Donald Trump did this to see that a number of state attorneys general were looking at possible state charges against some of these people like Anthony Fauci. We cannot give away the signal that this kind of lawlessness, this kind of crazy criminality is going to go unpunished, because what that will do, aside from just letting off the perpetrators, it will encourage more such lawlessness and criminality in the future. So kudos to President Trump for this. I hope the DOJ will now use every tool.
Now we get to the part that sounds extreme, until you realize history has already written this script. Alex Newman's warning about governments begging for your physical metals isn't hyperbole. It's a prediction rooted in precedent. When monetary systems begin to unravel, governments don't just panic, they act with force. And as confidence in fiat currencies collapses, the need for something tangible to restore trust becomes urgent. Physical silver, held outside the system, suddenly becomes not just valuable, but essential. This is where the talk of martial law starts to make sense. In moments of extreme crisis, when people lose faith in money, commerce grinds to a halt. The state's ability to function hinges on reestablishing value, fast. Historically, that's meant turning to gold and silver. But this time, gold may be locked up in sovereign vaults, while silver, more accessible, more transactional, is scattered among private holders. And when that happens, governments won't just want silver, they'll need it. The very same institutions that mocked precious metal advocates could soon be knocking on their doors, asking, bargaining, or even demanding a path back to monetary credibility.
Your viewers have, some of them, heard me quite a few times. I am no apologist for Vladimir Putin and his gangster regime, not by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's very dangerous. I think what he has done over a period of many years deserves to be condemned. But you can't just call everybody you disagree with a Russian puppet and expect the world to believe you, right? That's foolishness. And so the new guy who has now jumped in. He's now considered the front runner. His name is George Simeon. He's the founder and the chairman of the second largest political party in Romania, and very similar to Georgescu. He's a patriot. He wants to put Romania first. He wants to stop World War III. He doesn't want that NATO base being used as a springboard to launch the Third World War with the Russians. He's advocating for the preservation of family in the face of globalist assault. He's advocating for the preservation of sovereignty in the face of globalist schemes from Brussels. And so they're after him now. And I just had the privilege of bringing him on my show for about 10 minutes earlier today to break down the latest there. And Americans are really not paying attention. I mean, the fake media is saying the far right guy is now the front runner. What they mean is the guy who doesn't agree with the globalist craziness is the front runner. So people should be watching, because they're doing the same thing there that they did here, and they will do it again here if they're not stopped.
Governments around the world have a long history of stockpiling precious metals when trust in fiat breaks down. And they don't wait until the headlines hit panic levels. They move early, quietly, and in bulk. Just look at central banks buying gold at record rates over the past 2 years. But silver? It's the wild card. Its lower price, dual role as an industrial and monetary metal, and historic undervaluation make it a far more explosive hedge in times of crisis. And here's the kicker. When silver starts to move, it doesn't inch upward. It gaps violently. In past collapses, we've seen nations impose capital controls, restrict withdrawals, and even seize gold under the guise of national interest. If that level of desperation returns, silver becomes not only a store of value, but an escape route, a lifeline to the real economy. That's why Alex Newman is sounding the alarm. Once this cracks open, once the institutions lose control of the narrative and the public starts demanding real value over digital promises, the chase for silver will become a stampede. And by then, those who already hold physical will be in a position of power no government can ignore.
Yeah, what's happening in Romania is hugely significant, and it's not just significant for Romanians and Europeans, it's significant for Americans too, because we're seeing these kinds of things happening all over the world. So in Romania, they're about to have a presidential election. They actually already had the first round of their presidential election, and the man who won, Călin Georgescu, won the first round, was actually detained by authorities in Romania, and now he has officially been disqualified, so he cannot even run for president anymore, even though he won the first round. And they're alleging that the Russian connections, might have bought some social media ads to support him, and so he's not allowed to be in the presidential race. From a finance perspective, the regime has just basically dropped the mask now, and anybody who really paid attention to what was going on back in the 90s understood that this was a communist revolution disguised as a freedom struggle, and now they're just dropping the mask. Now they're entering what they call the second phase of the National Democratic Revolution, which is the phase where they don't even pretend anymore. They just say, yeah, we're commies. We've always been commies. And yeah, we're going to take your stuff. They call it expropriation without compensation, which is a fancy way of saying we're going to steal your stuff. And so for investors, you really want to pay close attention to this. You don't want to invest a bunch of money in South Africa just to have this gaggle of criminals say, well, yeah, we're just going to have to expropriate that from you because you got the wrong skin color, or because your business partner doesn't have the right skin color, or because we don't like you, or because, whatever we say. So it's very, very dangerous situation there. And what's going on with Trump has, of course, recently passed an executive order promising protection to the Afrikaners. The Afrikaners are a very interesting people group. They are largely descended from the Dutch, Danes, French, Germans, etc. But they are, of course, a unique African nation. Sometimes they see themselves as an African tribe. And they are under relentless assault right now from the government. You've got top-level people in the government going on TV, filling up stadiums and saying, bring me my machine gun. We're going to shoot all these people. And it's really horrific. No people would tolerate this madness in any other country, in any other context. But because it's happening in South Africa against the hated Afrikaner, suddenly we're supposed to say, oh, yeah, that's fine. It's vile. It's horrific. South Africa deserves much better. And of course, unfortunately, the U.S. government played a major role in bringing this situation about, just like they did in former Rhodesia turned Zimbabwe. And so, I think we have some obligation to at least help some of the victims that were created as a result of outrageous U.S. foreign policy.
What Alex Newman is really warning us about isn't just a silver rally, it's a systemic failure. The collapse of confidence in paper assets, the relentless erosion of fiat money, the looming threat of martial law, these aren't distant possibilities. They're converging now. And when the tipping point hits, silver will not just rise, it will explode. The governments that once ridiculed hard asset holders will become their most desperate customers, scrambling to secure anything real as their currencies lose meaning. But the time to act isn't when the panic hits. It's before. Because once the breakout begins, silver won't wait for anyone. If you followed this far, you already understand the stakes. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next. And remember, this isn't financial advice. Always speak to a licensed professional before making any investment decisions.
Well, there does seem to be a very serious effort to downsize the Department of Education. About half of the staff now, it looks like, are going to be pushed out the door, and that's a very good start. But I would tell people, even abolishing the Department of Education is just a baby step in the right direction. It's not going to magically solve all these problems. It's not going to be safe to send your child to your local government brainwash camp just because the U.S. Department of Education is shut down. I would also caution that there are very, very serious efforts by the swamp, by the deep state, to sabotage this effort and to really just redistribute all these functions from the U.S. Department of Education to HHS and Justice and Labor and Interior and State, which would not only not be a step in the right direction, be a step in the wrong direction, because now we've allowed all these new bureaucracies to have influence in our public school system. We've scattered these functions across a range of institutions, making it much harder to track. So I think we need to be very careful here. And there's another thing that I'm concerned about, too. There are powerful people around Trump who are pushing him to create a federal school choice program where the government would basically just give you free money. And I think Trump is very well intentioned here, but I don't think he understands the danger of this fully yet. UNESCO put out a report a couple years ago where they said the way to bring non-state education providers under government control was by giving them free government money. So we need to be very wary of that. There's another proposal that Trump is seriously entertaining that I think is far better, that would allow parents to just withhold some of their normal tax money from the regime if they decide to do the right thing and pull their children out of the government school. I think that's a much safer option than having our money go to D.C. and then come back to us with handcuffs attached.